And now, here's Ted.
And good morning, all you beautiful, wonderful people across this great land of ours. It's great to be alive. And we have, as usual, he's getting to be a regular on this show, Gene Chip Tatum, 25-year deep cover CIA agent. And we'll get to Chip in just a minute. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about drugs and Mexico. You know, the president's going to be visiting Mexico on Monday, as a matter of fact. And there's an article in the Dallas Morning News today, and it's captioned, Clinton rethinking certification options. He wants to avoid congressional fight over Mexico's cooperation in the drug war. And, of course, the House International Relations Committee voted Wednesday to abolish the certification program and give the president authority to impose optional sanctions on countries that allow money laundering and protection or trafficking of illegal drugs. Now, going through this article, Mr. Clinton did not call for abolishing the current system, but he said that he asked aides to try and get knowledgeable people in Congress from both parties to really take a hard look at this and make a bipartisan recommendation. By the way, this interview and this article is based on an interview with the president by the Dallas Morning News and two other newspapers, so it's an exclusive for three newspapers. Quoting the president, "You don't want to do something which appears on the surface to be tough, but actually undermines the ultimate objective. The ultimate objective is to reduce the volume of drugs coming into the United States. I got news for you, Mr. Clinton. You can reduce the amount of drugs coming into the United States through a number of means. First of all, you can get a hold of your folks over at the CIA office who are part of the shadow government, and you can tell them to knock it off, and you can take sanctions against them. And you're picking on Mexico and the biggest drug dealer in the world, number one drug dealer and the number one terrorist in the world is the CIA. Well, here's some suggestions for you, Mr. President. You can set up ground-penetrating radar to detect tunnels, and of course, in so doing, you're going to obviously have problems, with your own people, those who are corrupt and who deserve to be exposed and prosecuted, but we can always look the other way on that. Let's go after the Mexicans who are not involved with the CIA. Also, you can set up surveillance radar on top. The ground-penetrating radar will detect tunnels. You can do oceanic points that can be followed. You can follow the ships. You've got the El Paso Intelligence Center, which is the aerial radar. You've got spy satellites. You can divert one of those from the 500 miles in space to put a complete radar shield on the border. You can set up field stations, secret listening stations throughout the world. You've got the NSA and the National Security Agency right now tapping phones all over the world, monitoring overseas calls. Certainly you could come up with some information there. And, of course, you can put someone to listening for drug conversations, radio intercept, and so on and so forth. Now, you are aware, of course, that the drug czar of the United States is General McCaffrey. And I happen to have a little bit of information about General McCaffrey, which I find would be very interesting. The only problem with my information, it's informant information. I cannot, as a matter of fact, come forward with it at this point. Hopefully it'll be made public in the future. Chip Tatum, you're there.
Sure, I'm here, Ted.
Okay. What do you know about, what do you think about these sanctions and about the president's approach to the drug problem with Mexico? Did you have any contacts with Mexico or Mexican officials when you were with the CIA?
The Salinas brothers are about the only people that we dealt with down there.
And tell us about your association with them.
Well, I didn't have actual direct association. However, others that were flying out of Ilopango Air Base in El Salvador had spoken about the protected airfields. On one occasion in 1989, I recall at a monitoring site, we had tapes off of Swan Island. We had tapes of over 18 tons of cocaine being flown to a Mexican location in one large operation which involved several of the cartels from Colombia. They overflew Panama, they overflew Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, and flew into Mexico in excess of 18 tons in one night.
Well, were CIA people involved in that?
We monitored it. We didn't do anything about it.
Well, that's a pretty good answer. So what you're saying is you allowed it to go through?
It was allowed to go through, that's correct.
And hey, what is 18 tons worth on the street? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea.
Must be billions and billions. Maybe it would cover the national debt.
It's a nice retirement fund for someone.
Now, you talked about the Salinas. Were they involved with the CIA in drug operations?
The Salinas were involved in what Barry Seal called the Boss Hog, on his Boss Hog list, where he listed government officials around the world who were in fact involved in. Both Salinas were on that list. So I would assume that Mr. Seal knew quite a bit about the Salinas.
And Barry Seal was, of course, the fellow who was involved with the CIA in drugs and was assassinated in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in what, 1980 what?
1986.
1986, and he knew too much. He had been, as usual, tried and convicted of a crime, and the judge sentenced him over to some safe house where he had absolutely no protection. He came out one night and he was blown away by the Colombian cartel, I think, wasn't it?
By members of the Colombian cartel. The question is, who co-opted and paid for that hit?
Yes, and the question also is Barry Seal knew too much, right?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah, well, there's two ways of getting rid of you, folks, when you know too much about the shadow government CIA drug operation. One is to, as Chip says, neutralize them, and I say that's just plain murder. And the other way is to set them up and frame them and send them off to jail and discredit them. Usually it's one of the two ways. Chip, you talked yesterday about the operation in Cambodia where you went in on Operation, was it Red Rock? Is that what you called it?
That's right, Operation Red Rock, into the Phnom Penh airport in Cambodia.
Yeah, now, folks, bear in mind, they were our Alps. Time for a quick break, folks. We'll be right back. Ted Gunderson, Intelligence Report. And we're back. My guest today is Chip Tatum, and we were talking about how the CIA neutralizes individuals who know too much. And I'd mentioned Operation Red Rock, which was a raid 1971 on the Cambodian airport. Chip and others were dressed in North Vietnamese uniforms, and President Nixon gave the order to eliminate them after they finished their mission, and Cambodia being a friendly country. That's the way they deal with people who know too much, right, Chip?
That's correct. Can I take a minute and go down the list of the code names of the men who were on Team Red Rock and what happened to them?
Yes, please do.
There were 3 killed by friendly fire, U.S. fire. However, I will say on the U.S.'s part, we were dressed in sapper uniforms. They didn't know who we were. There was a United States Air Force colonel who knew who we were, but told them that we were the enemy. He was looking for a star. Chief.
Who was that colonel?
He's in the book. I don't know where he is now, but now that I'm out, I would like to start a search and see if I can find him. I'm going to do that behind the lines, if you know what I mean.
Well, you might be able to give him a star, the star he's looking for.
Sure. Chief was an American Indian Green Beret. He was killed by the door guns of a CH-53 Jolly Green Giant at our pickup zone. Cajun was from Louisiana. He was CIA. Cajun was killed by the door guns of that same CH-53 Jolly Green at the pickup zone. Super Cop was from the northeastern U.S., a former naval intelligence officer and current Navy SEAL. He was killed by U.S. F-4 fighters attacking an anti-aircraft artillery site that we had attacked, and they came in and took over and finished the deal. Killed by enemy fire was one called the Kid. He was a Vietnamese-American CIA. His parents he worked in the embassy. The Kid was killed by an NVA patrol as Red Rock crossed an open field. Captured by the North Vietnamese were our platoon sergeant, My Wei, a U.S. Army Captain Green Beret. My Wei was tortured to death by a Chinese officer. His skin was torn from his body. He died from exposure, shock, and loss of blood. Bagman was U.S. Army, Green Beret. Bagman died of wounds received from a Soviet officer's pistol following torture and interrogation. Cowboy was from Texas, a U.S. Army Green Beret. Cowboy was tortured by a Soviet officer and a Chinese officer. He died of suffocation. Flame was a U.S. Army Green Beret. Flame was killed with Cowboy on the torture post by the Soviet and Chinese officers. He was decapitated by a Chinese officer during interrogation. Snake, United States Marines. Snake was tortured and interrogated by Soviet and Chinese officers. Folks, I want you to listen to this. These are Chinese officers now I'm talking about.
And Soviets.
And Soviets. He died by decapitation. Pablo, of Mexican descent, U.S. Navy SEAL. Pablo escaped during torture but was captured, interrogated, and tortured to death by a Soviet officer. Haystack, from Kansas. U.S. Army Green Beret. Haystack was shot in the abdomen by Chinese officers. He died of his wounds only minutes after the U.S. Marine Patrol liberated us and began treating his wounds. It was Haystack's heroism that attracted the Marines' attention to us while we were in captivity. Pop, our platoon sergeant, U.S. Army Green Beret, Pop was wounded in the chest and head by U.S. Marines. The Marine was not aware that Pop was a serviceman, a U.S. serviceman. He may have survived his wounds. He was shipped stateside for emergency medical care. He was in a coma. He had severe brain swelling. Highway, which was me, Bulldog, Air Force Combat Controller, I'm here.
So
and I'm here and I'm talking.
Yeah, and two of you survived, Chip.
Two of us survived. That's
Would that be Pop and you?
That's Pop and me.
And Pop, you don't know his full name?
Just Chuck. I know that I have some information that's come in to me from several sources around the U.S. that I'm following up on now.
Okay, what we want to do, Chuck or Chip, is on the second hour. Let's go over that again because that second hour goes shortwave around the world, and let's give it another shot. And I have been told that the second hour with shortwave and satellite between the two of them, we have an audience of over 3 million people. So we'll review that again on the second hour.
Great.
Okay, now, is there anything more you want to talk about as far as Mexico is concerned and the drugs coming through there?
I don't believe so. I know Mexico is one of the large transshipment points, as is now coming across the northern border of the United States. We're able to fly. Even single-engine aircraft can take off, specially equipped single-engine aircraft take off from Colombia, fly to the Bahamas, rest overnight, wait for a weather window, go up into Nova Scotia, come across to the Weyburn area of Saskatchewan, and then come down into Montana, North Dakota, any of those areas, and drop their drugs.
What about the El Paso Intelligence Center? Folks, that's a special setup in El Paso, Texas. I visited there when I was head of the FBI in Dallas in my day, and Art Fleur was the man in charge, a good man with DEA. There are some good folks out there, folks, who have been involved with the government. And anyway, they keep track of all the ships and all the airplanes coming into the United States or coming north from South and Central America, follow them, surveillance, etc. What about them? Are they effective anymore, or do you know?
EPIC is only as good as the intelligence given into them.
And did you have anything to do with EPIC?
No, but some confidential informants that I investigated, some people that were on customs staff that I investigated who were running certain sites around the Caribbean, were shutting them down and letting aircraft come through, so the intelligence never got through to EPIC.
Okay, time for a quick break, folks. Be right back. Ted Gunderson, Intelligence Report. And we're back, folks. My guest today is Chip Tatum, 25-year deep cover CIA operative. Chip, before we go any further, the second hour yesterday's show, many people listening today did not hear that, cannot hear it. By the way, it's on shortwave. If you want to buy a shortwave radio, you can call 1-800-205-6245. You should get it for the second hour every day, ladies and gentlemen. You're missing out on a lot of good, solid intelligence information. But in that second hour yesterday, in order to enlighten the people that did not hear it or on listening to this show today, we talked mainly, I'd say the highlight of the hour was we talked about how you were set up on a deal and your wife and you were charged in order to discredit you. Why don't you repeat that for us today for these folks?
That's a typical, when I talk about neutralizations, Ted, we have 3 techniques we use to neutralize a person. And neutralization is, if you imagine putting a car in neutral and moving it where you want to. Well, that's what we do in neutralizations. We can intimidate them, we can coerce them into doing what we want, or we can neutralize them. You know, the coercion portion would be the defamation of character. And that's basically what they wanted to do. They needed, because of the information I have in the Tatum Chronicles and in other documents that I published since then, they need to say that I'm not a credible witness against these particular people, simply because if this information is credible and it comes out, they will go to prison for the rest of their lives.
That's the goal, isn't it?
That's absolutely the goal.
And I'll help you any way I can. Go ahead. Tell us how they set you up.
I was charged initially with a type of fraud it's Title 18-1007. There's been very few prosecutions under it, but it's conspiring to hold back information from the FDIC. They said that I didn't disclose total ownership of the companies that I'd owned. The person who felt felt heavy in his shoulders because of the terrible deeds that he did, walked in to